Hey guys, it's a little awkward because I haven't done this for a really long time, but I don't really know what to say. It's just 2018 was a bad year. I guess I'll leave it at that for now. We go on for a long time, but something made me think of this game again, and I figured maybe I should get back to it. So we're at the end of the fairy side quest here, and gonna fight Yao the Hammer. And what's supposed to be like a takeoff on the evil overlord, end boss battle that you see in so many other games. So, but here you're gonna get his side of the story about how about how much it sucks if you're an evil overlord to have enemies that can never die, basically, thanks to the intervention of fairies or whatever else you've got in the game. But this guy was a little smarter than some of his contemporaries, I guess, in the sense that he was able to realize what was going on, and if he ever wanted to stop the heroes, he had to stop the fairies. So that was his goal. And that the fairy government must be destroyed. It must be strangled in the bathtub. Now that's kind of a weird quote, but there's a reason for it, which is that there's a quote from some right-winger who said that the federal government had to be strangled in the bathtub, or it had to be so small that it could be strangled in the bathtub. Basically because they don't want to pay taxes. I mean, that's so that's what that was about. I'm assuming that when it comes to like keeping transgender people out of bathrooms, they don't want the government to be strangled in that case. But consistency is not their thing, especially now. But then we're fighting this guy, and you get to pick the boss fight song, which is I just thought that was a funny little touch. Because you gotta have music for these things. It's just, it's just the way it is. And even though this is a silly situation, it can be a fairly challenging fight. He's got a lot of hit points, a few really strong attacks, and this is, if I recall correctly, this was the first time we had an enemy that could counter an attack with a magic spell instead of just a attack. He hasn't cast it yet, but I mean hopefully this is the one I'm thinking of. Eventually Shroud learns a variation on that. So yeah, it's a pretty long fight, but I mean it's not, you keep yourself healed and fight smart, you're good. Nothing terrible. Oh, there we go. Yeah, he just cast a counter spell. Yeah, so see, Stoic hit him with the Bull Rush, and then the Greater Darkness came, I think. Wait, I don't know, these fights go quick, I gotta pay attention. But yeah, I believe I don't know if it's just physical attacks he does that too. Okay, there it is again. No, he did it to her. So yeah, it's any attack that hits him. So he won't do it to the healing spell, of course. So yeah, that was a neat little thing to introduce. And oh, sorry, I'm out of practice. But yeah, I guess I could talk a little bit more about why I'm back now. I guess it sort of occurred to me that this is, if I'm remembered for anything in my life, it's probably going to be this game. Which, could be worse. And, it's been so long since we did it. I mean, even this, this is kind of getting into the second half of the game, and, we're... Oh, there he goes. Bye. We get into, the second half of the game here, and it's, when did we do this one? I think Arc 4 was, 2007, maybe? And so that's 12 years ago. And and so there's not a whole lot of people talking about this game anymore, which is to be expected. But every so often, Art Bain will send me some kind of Reddit thread or forum discussion or something where people are kind of reminiscing, and that's kind of cool to see. So I guess must have been something like that made me think of getting back to this. And so now we're into the sort of the meeting to discuss everything that's happened, and this is written in a pretty specific way. It was meant to be as similar to an actual local government meeting as I could make it. Because I was a reporter for a number of years, and I went to a lot of meetings like this. Basically, where every person who speaks has to be recognized, and every time they want to do something, somebody's got to make a motion, then somebody has to make a second, and then they have to vote on it. So it can be kind of tedious, but I think just the fact that it's fairies is funny enough that it goes over okay. And so the fairies learn a little bit of a lesson here about checks and balances, which is that you don't want their top executive to have supreme power. You want to be able to have another branch of government that can intervene if something goes wrong. And I think that's just sort of an important part of democracy, really. But but it can. These tools can be abused too. It's tough. It's tough to keep everything in balance. But the fairies are making progress. So the heroes get a cookie of valor, which levels up everybody, which is pretty amazing. Enough to make Yala jealous. He's having a full-on tantrum here. I hate everything. And but he's not big on hugs either, but that's kind of what fairies do, so, whoa! No! That gets a laugh, usually. I made the map for that area, the council chambers, really tall, so I had empty space at the top that I could do that pan with, because that makes it. That's why it's so funny. If you just kind of cut away, it wouldn't have been as good. So we're wrapping up here, and I'm trying to think. There's a kind of a condition here where let's see if it comes up. Oh yeah, this is it. Yeah, there's an end part here where Stoic mentions the man who kind of kicked this whole thing off by saying that he was asking for some food assistance and it never happened because of all the trouble at the ferry headquarters. So if you talk to him, that bit comes up, but you can start this quest without having to talk to him. You could just kind of wander into the ferry building and kick it off. So I had to make a kind of a condition there. But honestly, there aren't a whole lot of conditional branches in this game, at least story-wise. Obviously there's all sorts of them when you get to the puzzles and such. That's kind of a different thing. But story's very linear, and that's fine. I'm good with that. But just even in the limited amount that I've done on Legacy, which is the game I'd like to have as a sequel to this Sunday, God only knows when. I've already used a lot of them just because there's a lot of there's a lot more freedom in terms of who's in your party at any particular time, or even what kind of magic your character uses or what weapon. So it's kind of interesting to do. It's different from a writing standpoint, but was getting some new armor, not necessarily to use right this second, but just to use for recipes later on. And this is actually the end of that mind-reading puzzle. If you remember, before we started the fairy thing, we were going around town, reading people's minds, trying to figure out where Colmarin was. And Laurel got enough information to figure out that he was a deer. And so she sort of, let the cat out of the bag, and Cassie lets him downstairs. And those are the new recipes, so let's see if we can do any. No, not yet. See, you get a lot of these jewels from the dungeon. So we get to make all sorts of neat things once we start going around there. My pocket watch is OP. I gotta make sure I'm able to make it. Because it's really good. But, we'll put on the stuff for now, just to keep them in good shape. Although we got a number of cutscenes to do before we get to the next dungeon. This, it's funny, I mean, I guess by this game standards, it's not that many cutscenes. But, it's kind of a lot. There's a lot of things that are going to happen in a row here. Alright, okay, let's get down here. So this is where we meet Colmarin for the first time. And Laurel has, of course, figured out that they're romantically involved right away. Everyone always tries to lie. It's so sad. Finley mentions that you heard your beard. But he spreads a rumor that he shaved his beard so that nobody will think he still has a beard. So it's a little... he's kind of paranoid. He's been hiding for a while, and it's gone to him a little bit. But he knows enough about recent history to figure out who Shroud is. And the bad habits. But so he put it together right away. Which, well, I guess everybody's been figuring it out. That's sort of a running joke here. But, we've been looking for this guy for a while in terms of the storyline, and, lots of ups and downs in terms of looking for information about the Hand and Equipment King, which is, what Shroud's recapping here. And Marin would rather not testify at any trial, at least at this point. He's concerned for safety. But he didn't keep his copy of his manuscript here. But which is probably smart, because now there's Hand guys prowling around trying to start a new Equipment King, and so he left a copy way out in the boonies, like Finley says. So they're gonna have to go there if they want it. No fax machines in Solist. Oh geez, yes. I'm probably dating myself with that. You guys probably don't even know what fax machines are. Back in my day, the 90s, there were these machines that you just kind of like, it's kind of like a copier and a phone. And you could put a piece of paper on there, and you would copy it and send it to another fax machine. So, before we could do email attachments, that was the way to go. And now we're back to our vampires. If you recall, Gabrielle went home looking for help, and instead she got zapped with holy spells and just treated like poo, despite being one of the star students at the monastery. So she's had quite a wake-up call. And it's a brutal lesson, really. And she changed her outfit. I believe it was Anchor that designed her new getup. We originally had her just in her monastery robe.
the robes that she's been wearing like this whole time, or up until this point, I guess. But when Anchor was working on her battler, he kind of came up with this alternate costume, and it made sense from a story point of view as well, just because, why would you still want to wear your monastery outfit if the people there are treating you so bad? So that's the explanation for that. Plus, it looks cool. And then this very serious scene gets a little bit of a laugh because she's trying to figure out how to avoid biting people, but she needs blood, so she needs she bit a cow. She went to a farm and just took a bite. But because you never really hear about that. If you hear about vampire bats, that's an old thing. But you don't really see too many movies where it was like a vampire lizard or a vampire cow or a vampire cat. Well, maybe it's a cat. Sometimes cats have good teeth for that. But anyway, so that was the gag, and I guess there's something in the body chemistry of the more advanced life forms on Solus that makes them more vulnerable to becoming a vampire or something. So this is now what they have a pretty interesting discussion here. Heard very little about Sparrow in this arc so far. And so this was a pretty big conversation, just because the player learns a lot more about like the history of the persona. And this tends to surprise a lot of players just because he comes out with a name right away, Evander Till, who, if you watched my Clean Slate Let's Play, there's he's in that. He was in that game. Pretty important role in like the last act as one of the galleon officers. But he kind of was all finished with Gallia by the time the game has ended. But it's still when you do that sort of thing, when you work for a genocidal empire, it tends to cast a shadow over the rest of your life, even if you're not into it anymore. I guess it's a more extreme version of how you can take down somebody on Twitter just by like pointing out something racist they said 10 years ago or something like that. So moral of the story, be careful what you say, be careful what you do, especially on the internet. God. So he lays out three possibilities here. And so this sort of gives you a little roadmap for the rest of the Sparrow mystery. First possibility is that Evander's still alive, although he would be very old. The second is that it's just somebody else in the costume and using the name. And the third is that it's an undead Evander, which, it could happen. But now for another change of pace, we got the Bubs coming into town, plastered, after falling off the carriage, or being thrown off. We'll never know. So, Bubba being an alcoholic has sort of been like a funny thing up until this point. But this is actually a bit where it starts to get a little more serious, start to like really look at what this kind of thing does to your life. And I think this was a little risky because you don't want to turn into like a very special sitcom episode or whatever. But I think if you're gonna have an alcoholic character, you ought to be a little honest about it. And this was very much a spur of the moment thing to have Bubba assume this this larger role in the narrative. But and it all happened because of this one little comic where basically, Art Bane was having a moment there for a while where he was doing a couple of little Master of the Wind comics. He's a decent artist. You know, and actually, I probably mentioned this before, but he did the original Shroud and Stoic Battlers for the very early versions of the first arc, and they didn't look too bad. I mean, Anchor's like, you know, pro level, so that was an improvement. But Art Bane's pretty good, and so he did a few comics about. Well, we did one about Shroud and Stoic's first meeting, because you never see it in this game. It's only referenced. And that one actually got adapted into a short little computer-generated movie by one of our biggest fans, or at least at the time. Guy goes by, actually, C4D Nerd. That's what he calls himself now. But on our forum, he was Master of the Wind fan, which, you know, says it all. It's called Kindred Spirits. If you want to look it up, make sure you put in, you know, Master of the Wind Kindred Spirits if you want to see it, because otherwise you just get, you know, it's kind of a common phrase, so you'll get all sorts of other stuff. But anyway, so we did a few of these comics, and there was another kind of off-screen incident that Art Bane wanted to kind of draw, which was the bit towards the beginning of the game, or I think it's the beginning of Arc 2, where Sod is laughing as he recalls a little bit of an altercation at the bar between Finley and Bubba. And so we kind of had that. We had, you know, I'm not sure you ever like totally finished the comic. We never released it. It was only one page, but it was you know, Finley insulting Bubba, and then Bubba, like, you know, slamming the table, threatening Finley, and threatening to beat him up, and then Finley shoots the leg out from his chair, and he falls, and that was pretty much it. But something about actually like drawing Bubba made him think, you know, more about like what might have happened to you know, turn him into the person he is. And that was basically how we decided to add him to this arc, because this arc was not necessarily as detailed in the early planning stages as some of the others. We knew Arc 3, you know, pretty well. We had planned that for a while. And Arc 5, of course, is the Stoics' history, so that one we had planned out for a long time beforehand. But this middle segment here wasn't as you know, formally laid out, so there was room for kind of spur of the moment ideas, and that was one of them. So, you know, let me just recap a little bit, because I kind of talked over a few scenes here, but you know, I'm sure you guys could read. But we had a moment where Sod came dangerously close to telling Auburn who he is. He doesn't really like keeping this secret from her, and but, you know, the others rightly point out that as long as she works for Equipment King, it's probably a bad idea, because if she knows, it probably wouldn't take much for Kovac to figure it out, and then Ketsu figures it out, and then they got trouble. Although they don't really know who Ketsu is yet. Although, well, Sod met him briefly in Arc 3, if you remember, but doesn't know about the connection to the hand. So Sod flips out, snaps at Laurel, and she rushes off. She's upset. And he's mad at Laurel because Laurel was reading his mind, which he doesn't like. You know, he's sort of nervous about that sort of thing. You know, he keeps a lot of his feelings to himself, so he doesn't really like somebody looking at him. And that may seem like just a minor, like, tiff between the characters, but it actually has ramifications later. And now we're getting to a pretty fun scene that took me... Woman, that ain't fair. That dude's like a bro. But we're getting to a pretty fun bit here. Oh, my chair's creaking. Sorry about that. Where Ando decides he's just going to attack Auburn, even though Auburn works for Kovac, and he's cut a deal with Kovac. So that's trouble. But, you know, Auburn's a very sort of confident, attractive woman, and kind of like the one that lured Andau to his fate as a vampire. And actually, I should mention this too, because we're going to get into a lot of stuff about Andau and his past and all that. Originally, there was a bonus scene at the end of Arc 3 that told Andau's origins. And, you know, I might have already said this. I probably have. So I won't go, huge into detail again. But, we wrote this assuming that most of our fans had seen that. And so there's a lot of references to it. But I think now it could come off as a little bit like, random, some of it. People are like, well, what's that about? Where'd that come from? Because it's not included in the finished thing here. And I don't know, if we ever release another edition of this game, I'd like to have it put back in, because I was always pretty proud of that. It was a unique scene. But yeah, just I'll fill in the gaps as needed for the purposes of this. But just to explain briefly, so Finley tried to cheer up Laurel, didn't do a particularly good job. But sometimes people just get in a mood and they don't really want to be cheered up. They just kind of want to vent, or and that's it happens. So Bubba remembers that sometimes the Finster gets on me nerves. He remembers that Laurel's a psychic, and so he's kind of trying to figure himself out a bit. His memory's not in the best shape because of his prolonged alcohol use. I'm not sure if kobolds can get cirrhosis of the liver. We'll hope not. Because that's kind of what happens if you drink as much as he does. So she's going to help him out. She goes, oh goodness, what a mess. And she's uncovered a memory of the raids on the Cobalt settlements during the Galleon times by Coulter, who I think I told the story behind her name back in the Clean Slate Let's Play, so I won't repeat it. But yeah, it's an interesting piece of the game's backstory, and it seems to be pretty interesting to fans too. There was one of our fans for a while was sort of brainstorming about like a kind of a tactical game, tactical kind of like military fighting game with the kobolds fighting off the Galleon forces, and that would have been really neat. But honestly, probably too ambitious for one person to do anyway. But it was a cool idea. So now we have this fight scene, which took me quite a while. All these, none of these, cinematic fight sequences last very long to watch, but good lord, they take a long time. Because you gotta test everything. It's gotta be just right. One thing's off, then, the next thing's off. Somebody's in the wrong place, then nothing else is gonna work. You really gotta, be thorough. And, but it is fun. It's very satisfying. So I didn't mind it. And indeed, there are plenty more of these to come. But Auburn's kind of beating the shit out of him because he didn't expect him to be particularly tough. But and he probably underestimates her for being a woman because he's kind of a dick about that. Which honestly, like, I don't know. Sexism's kind of made like a pretty big resurgence in the last few years. It's almost, people probably, like, if they play this now, they probably see this as a commentary on, like, bros on the internet who, complain about women or can't stand if there's like a female superhero or whatever. They get all pissy. But honestly, it wasn't supposed to be about that. I mean, this is, that just wasn't as big of a thing at the time. But Aubrey's getting tired, and he's trying to get Gabriella to bite her. But she won't do it. Oh, it's tense. Alright, I'll do it. But then a holy spell to the face. So Laurel must have noticed the commotion. Sensed it. And then this is the first time that these two have really met at all. And Laurel tries to explain that just closing wounds on somebody with healing magic isn't the same as resting after a fight. So she's got to take a breather. And everybody's sort of terrorized by the fight in the bazaar there. So Stroud and Stork are like, what the hell's going on? And then this is the reunion of enemies. But Stoic is very upset about this. And well, they both are. But he can't stand it because his enemies always come back. Which, actually, that quote is very similar to something that Spider-Man once said in a comic where, one of the enemies that he thought was dead showed up again. He made a comment that, like, he knew so many people who he loved who were dead and stayed dead. Although, honestly, in comic books, you can't really count on that either. But, the villain's almost inevitably comes back. But Saad just got a good look at undead Gabriella, and he's really, not taking it very well. And you can't blame him, like, he's been completely blindsided. And it was his idea. Well, he was the one who got her all worked up about Kovac and Equipment King in the first place, so he did indirectly play a role, but Stoic knows better. Stoic's had enough tragedy to know how to keep your head in the game. When something happens, as mad as he was, he sort of shook it off pretty quick. And now they're going to fight Kovac and Vec, which is a fun bit, but I don't think we're going to get to it this time. This has gone on for a while. So let's just get through a couple more cutscenes and we'll call it a day. Now, this is what I was talking about before. This is Andau's younger sister, where in the flashback sequence that I made, she kind of, they got along well. They, she kind of admired him a little bit, and but then when Andau was bitten, he came back, and like when they figured out what had happened to him, his family just like packed up and left. But she's saying that it was her parents' idea, and she was just a kid who didn't really have a say in it. But she never really gave up on him, and she wants to help. But he's very bitter and not really. He doesn't really want to entertain like hope, because that's painful if you suffered a lot. Because you start to think that, like, if I get my hopes up, something bad's just going to happen, and it'll hurt worse if I, think that it's not going to happen, so might as well always expect the worst. I've certainly had moments like that. So this is a little bit of a girl bonding here. And they did see each other briefly on the boat back from Boreal. And it's a little bit of small talk here. But Laurel's trying to, not spill the beans because, she doesn't necessarily want the equipment guys to know that they're in town, but she's not doing a very good job. So, well, since I can see you already figured it out, I might as well tell you. I'm here with Shroud, Stoic, and the Baron. So, yeah, just kind of admit defeat on that one. But I guess we'll wrap it up at the end of this scene, and we should be able to do the big fight, and then start the dungeon. And that'll be a good time, and hopefully it won't be like a year and a half before I do that. Yeah, so let's hope that I'm going to try to do this, regularly. But I don't want to make any promises that are too unrealistic, but maybe like once a month. Maybe it'll be quicker than that if I'm, inspired. It's kind of hard to get, to find the time to sit and talk for this long too without somebody interrupting me, or just having something to do. So that's part of it. But yeah, I'll hope that I can maybe keep it going once a month. Although if that's the case, it's going to be years before we get through the rest of this game. There's plenty left. But yeah, we'll try and do that. We'll try and say once a month, just so we don't set any expectations that are too unrealistic. But for now, let's say goodbye. See you later.